Ask the Podcast Coach for August 12th, 2023.
Let's get ready to podcast.
There it is. It's that music that means it's Saturday morning. It's time for Ask the Podcast Coach, where you get your podcast questions answered live. I'm Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting.com, and joining me right over there is the one and only Jim Collison from theaverageguy.tv. Jim, I have a question for you. I know,
wow,
I'm interrupting.
Getting right off on it. I like it.
I always promote theaverageguy.tv.
Yeah.
But should I be promoting homegadgetgeeks.com?
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
Either one works. The site's theaverageguy.tv. The Home Gadget Geeks points to the pod page. And I use both.
There you go.
Either one is
but ladies and gentlemen, Jim Collison right there.
Greetings, Dave. Happy Saturday morning to you. You've thrown me off my rhythm. I don't know what to do. And we are a few minutes late to the live, folks. Apologize for that. But
there's a reason for that.
Yeah.
He said looking frantically for the music that he can't find because it sounds like, nope, I was going to do this. But that's really the wrong sound. It's this one. No. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we have a new patron. His name is Craig Van Slyke. The website livewellandflourish.com. And what's amazing about Craig is he's an amazing dude. Like I've known Craig. He's a member of the School of Podcasting, so he's double dipping. He's double supporting Dave. But he's is the Mike McAllister Eminent Scholar Chair in Information Systems at Louisiana Tech University. Prior to joining Tech, he was a professor and a dean of the W.A. Frank College of Business at Northern Arizona University. He also held faculty positions at St. Louis University, University of Central Florida, and Ohio University. He holds a PhD. We got smart people listening to the show.
Wow.
In Information Systems from the University of South Florida. Dr. Van Slyke, I've been just calling him Craig. It's Dr. Van Slyke, has published over 30 articles in respective academic journals, including Decision Sciences, Communications of the ACM, European Journal of Information Systems, and the Journal of the Association for Information Systems. His fourth co-authored textbook, Information Systems and Business and Experiential Approach, is in its third edition, not first, not second, third, and his first trade book on leadership in life, Essays on Leading and Living Well, was published back in 2017. I could go on and on. He's a very smart man, but what I want to do instead is I want to actually play you a clip of Craig, because I like Craig's, his show, Dr. Van Slyke's. His show is a great walk around the block kind of show. It's usually around 10, 15 minutes, but he did one on guilt, and here's just a quick clip.
The dark side of guilt is that it can be a soul-crushing emotion, especially when you feel guilty about feeling guilty, which is its own special kind of hell. But when guilt serves as a sort of diagnostic tool, it can help you live a flourishing life.
There you go. I found that one really handy, because there are times when we beat ourselves up over stuff we have nothing in control. And so the only thing that could make that show any better would be probably listening to it with a hot cup of Java there. So Jim's going to pour himself a cold one here, or a cold one. That would be a hot one. That would be bad. Although there is cold beer.
It's relative. I mean, it's cold to the temperature of the sun.
Yeah, there we exactly. And of course, that coffee pour is brought to you by our good friend Mark over at podcastbranding.co. If you want to look good, it's really simple, because they're going to see you way before they hear you. And if you're watching the video here, you can see where Mark has designed the Ask the Podcast Coach. He's designed the School of Podcasting. He's designed the Podcast Rodeo Show. And I wouldn't use him multiple times if he sucked. He's amazing. He's going to sit down with you. So try to get this from a guy on Fiverr. He's going to sit down with you. He's going to listen to your show. He's going to look at your website and just make sure that everything is seamless so that you get the maximum impact for your content. And not only is he an award-winning graphic artist, he's also a podcaster. So he's going to get that whole thing about, it's kind of like a radio show. No, he gets it. It's amazing. And so he's been featured all over the place. He's spoken at Podcast Movement and Podfest, and he's been on this show. He's been on the School of Podcasting. And so there's only one place to go, and that is podcastbranding.co.
Big thanks to Dan Lefebvre over there, Based on a True Story podcast at basedonatruestorypodcast.com. This week, he is looking at the movie Little Big Man with Gregory J.W. Irwin. The story, it's a 1970 satirical film. So you were like, Little Big Man. Yeah, it was 1970. They go back and look at those. So if you're looking for something new to listen to, or you just want to hear a really great podcast, check it out. Based on a truestorypodcast.com. Dan, thanks for your sponsorship.
And Coach Dave is saying, wow, the segment transitions this morning are smooth. Somebody got some good sleep last night. I did, actually. And I should mention, in case you saw things on Facebook, I'm fine. I was in a car accident this week. I got rear-ended. The only slight damage to me was I had a couple bruised knuckles for a couple days, which I was really surprised because I don't know about you, but once you get to like your 50s, it takes forever for anything to heal. My car is fine. It's dented. Nobody was hurt, but you can hear about that, by the way. If you go to betterdave.com, I did a whole episode about that. But we do have our first question this morning is somebody was asking about starting a podcast for their job. Can I protect my rights to a podcast if I do the podcast for work? And I was like, oh, I know somebody who does a podcast for work. My boss wants me to start a podcast for work under the slim chances this podcast gets big and starts to generate revenue, which is a bit of a head scratcher. How do I protect my rights to it? I'm the host. I'm creating the content. I came up with the idea, the name, etc. We haven't started recording it yet, so I'm trying to get ahead of the ball here. Not sure if I need to lawyer up or what a contract or write a contract or whatever. Has anyone been through something similar? And I was like, well,
yes. Yes, indeed. Yeah. Yes, indeed. This guy, never been asked about that, ironically. But when you, the first thing you should do is check what you signed when you joined the organization that you're a part of now. Oftentimes, for me, I'm under some pretty strict NDAs, as well as any content I create for the organization belongs to the organization. That's what I signed when I got there. Doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the organization. Doesn't matter if it was my idea or I created it or whatever. That's the agreement I signed, right? Everybody's like, some people may freak out at that, but that's the agreement. I signed it. So you might want to check and see, okay, what did I agree to when I joined the employment? Then I think if it's unclear with the organization, I think you should have some chats with those whoever, HR or whatever, to make sure you're very clear about this before you go forward with it. So get some things in writing. Get some clarity on it. Make sure everybody understands who owns what and who's doing what. Because this is the fastest way to lose a job, just to be honest. You can get in there. I mean, in podcasting, you can get in there and say something pretty fast that goes south pretty quick.
Yeah.
And you want them to protect you as much as you want to protect the rights of the stuff that you're making. So if it's not clear, get some clarity in the organization, get it in writing, and make sure everybody agrees on it. Now,
are you reading a script, or are you just kind of going off the top of your head?
Podcast, Gallup? Yeah. No, well, I mean, I have intro scripts, but everything else is, I mean, we have some outlines and we've got some things, but when I leave, those podcasts belong to Gallup. They don't belong to me. Right. So even though I was the host, it was my idea, all those kinds of things. It's very, very clear. It's their property.
You are the talent.
Yeah, for that, I get to use all the intellectual property that they have, and we've got a lot. And there's a lot of stuff to podcast on, and it's done some great things for my career.
There you go. And you're now worshipped at events. When you go to Gallup events, they're like,
well, yeah, worship's a little strong of a word.
It's Jim Collison.
Revered. Maybe I was this last week. Every once in a while we have this Joe on the go come in. It's a coffee. It's like a portable coffee shop, and they come in and make coffees for the employees. So I was coming in, standing in line, and I just walked up to one of the lines, and one of my friends was there, and I said, "Hey, Angela, how's it going?" And the gal that was with Angela turned around. I said, "Hey, I'm Jim Collison." She goes, "I love you." And then she was like, that wasn't meant to come out that way.
Yeah.
And she's like, she was a new employee and she's been listening to a lot of the podcasts. And so she was just like, it was just one of those moments where she's probably listened to dozens or 50s of hours of the podcast we do. And it just kind of caught her off guard. So those kinds of things, it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
I said, "Hey, thanks for listening. I appreciate that. That's pretty awesome." One of the cool things about what I do for the company is it's not just for customers. It's also our employees listen to it to get brought up to speed and train on and some of those kinds of things.
See, that's the thing. Tim in the chat room says, I run 7 podcasts for CBP. And he says 5 of them are internal. And that's the one I think, I don't know if people aren't thinking of it. They should. Back in the day, I used to drive about 25 minutes to Canton, Ohio to go to a sales meeting where the sales manager would say, "Get out there and sell, boys and girls." And we would then drive 25 miles to wherever our territory was. And it was like, if we had podcasting, they could have done that as a private podcast. And there are tools for that. And then you could listen to, the CE going, "Get out there and sell," on the way to the first call. Because I always thought about it, because they had to pay for mileage and gas. I'm like, those are expensive meetings to have somebody go, "We didn't hit our quota. Get out there and sell." It was like, oh, okay. So.
Yeah. It's, and I do, let's see, I think we have 9 podcasts now and 7 of them are my responsibility. And 2 of them, 5 of them are in another language. I just produce them, right?
Yeah.
I'm there and I just produce them. But it does, there are some, we figured out, even you said on the private, you could create it internally and make it a private podcast. We thought about that for a while. The technology gets a little screwy. So we just said, "Hey, everything we do, we're going to do like it's okay for the public to hear it."
Yeah.
And so we've made some internal stuff. We're like, well, if somebody else sees this, it's not a big deal. This would all be public information. And then we found some of them were great onboarding. So we required them or suggested that our new employees use them as onboarding. And that worked out really, really well. So they've gotten a lot of mileage. I think with the podcasts I've made, we've probably gotten as much mileage internally as we've gotten externally with them. Right? So they've been good. It's been good for the company. Yeah,
Of course, I think everybody should have a podcast, but that's one when, like in the early days, I was telling people, no, really, this is a big money. This thing will pay for itself in mileage and gas.
For sure.
Just doing an internal one.
The marketing folks that I work with now, when I started doing this, we had very little marketing team, so to speak, a marketing team. Now we have quite a large team that I'm working with, and the newer, the folks that have been there a year or two come to me. They see the numbers and they're like, "Dude, you can monetize this." And I'm like, "No, you don't understand. I am monetizing it with our product. Like it's ours. Why would I introduce another?" somebody else into the equation and dilute the brand.
Yeah.
Right? It's our brand. I control our brand. It's advertising for us. So that's just always a hilarious conversation that I have to have. They see so many podcasters, and maybe this is what this talks to, Dave, is they all listen to podcasts where they're getting outside monetization. So their first thought is, we could get advertisers to do this. And I'm like, no, I am advertising for us.
Well, that's
the goal.
That's the thing where he says, what if the thing starts to make real money? I'm like, no, don't. You're losing it. Why? I mean, I think at this point, I am done with advertising on the School of Podcasting because I am my own advertiser. And I remember when Focusrite said, "We want to give you money." And I said, "It's going to be expensive because you're bumping me." I could add a second sponsor, but you know how I feel about cramming more ads into a podcast. And I'm like, because you got to bump me out. They're like, "What does it take?" And I gave them a number. They're like, "Okay." And I was like, And then that was for 3 months. And that was one where I was like, I should ask for more maybe. But it really is because it's a great branding tool. And you can really work in, for lack of a better phrase, a pitch without making it really sound so pitchy. you know, and you're like, oh, well, we do this in our Strengths Finders course or whatever it is, you know, blah, blah, blah. And you just kind of, those little casual mentions, and you're delivering value on the podcast, so they already know you're good. Right. You know, I did an episode of Your Podcast Consultant that it was like 8 reasons why every coach should have a podcast, because when you are consistent in your schedule, you are seen as trustworthy. When you deliver good content, you're seen as valuable. And if you can kind of share a little bit about yourself, they kind of get to know you. And there's the whole know, like, and trust thing. And, you know, so when you say, oh, I've got a new book or a new course, or, you know, support me on Patreon or whatever, you know, you're going to have those people that actually take action.
Yeah. Just yesterday I did a podcast and 2 LinkedIn Lives. And we don't typically do that much on a single day, but that's just the way the calendar's worked out with resources. And it's been a while. It's maybe been 4 months, 5 months since I've done a LinkedIn Live out there. And I got a bunch of emails and some LinkedIn messages from folks who are like, oh, so glad you're back. Right. And they connect with the content, and they connect with what we do. And it's a good way of, it's a really good way of reminding them of the brand. They enjoy the time that they're there. And then we repurpose those and put them into the Clifton Strengths podcast channel, just as like, hey, if you missed it. But I think we had 300 registered, and maybe 120 showed up yesterday or something for those little half hour. Yeah. And they're just kind of alternative ways for us to continue to push push is probably the wrong word, but to expose the brand publicly and let folks interact with it.
Yeah. Adam Curry went on vacation with his wife. How dare you? Right. Which is good. On. Well, but I mean, and seriously, you need people to take time off and take care of themselves and have fun and that whole 9 yards. And it was weird because they're really good. They do a show on Friday, and it's usually by 8:00 Eastern. It's available. So when I'm out walking Friday night, I'm listening to the Podcasting 2.0 show. And what was really weird is I woke up on Saturday after going, oh, that's right, he's on vacation this week. I woke up Saturday, my brain still went, hey, you didn't listen to Podcasting 2.0 yet. And I was like, oh, that's right, he's on vacation still. So, but it was a weird thing. Now, I wasn't upset. I wasn't mad. I did see there was a thread on this on Reddit, and people were like, yeah, I kind of get, yanked off when, it's not there. And I'm like, yeah, but he announced he wasn't going to be there. I always say, if you're going to take a break, let people know. And if you don't, what are they going to do? Not pay you anymore? I mean, I get that, but it's it's one of those things where it does kind of you, and that's why we say if you can be consistent, then you become part of their routine. And so my Friday night routine is walking around the park, going grocery shopping at Walmart because it's Friday night, it's time to party.
Woohoo!
And that's how I roll because there's nobody shopping. There's nobody grocery shopping at Walmart on a Friday around 10:30. So it does, you become part of the routine. But here's the thing, exactly what Jim said. When next Friday rolls around and a new episode comes out, I'm going to be like, oh, I'm so glad they're back. So Coach Dave says, I've refused advertising on my show since day one. No one offered, but I would have refused it if they did. They always say there's a price for everything. I don't know about that, but it is that. We have another question here, and I'm not sure how to answer this one. Epileptic Rants. That sounds like a great show. Hey, Dave, our audio-only podcast on a serious decline. Well, the first thing I would ask is, what is serious? I think right now, from what I've seen, it depends on what you read. I know the number of podcast episodes being created is down from I know if you
Thank God.
Yeah, well, that's it. I think part of it is, if you noticed, think about now, I'm not saying this is the cause and effect here, but Spotify is kind of like, let's put that checkbook away, shall we? Maybe we overpaid for some stuff. A lot of companies cut a whole bunch of people, which is horrible. I hate to hear people losing their jobs, but they did because, well, the money wasn't quite what it was. So I think some people I'm jumping in and getting some of that Rogan money went, hey, wait, what? So maybe that's some of the reason why. I think also people are finding out that it's hard to make, it's not hard to make a podcast. It's hard to make a good podcast. So I don't know, but it's definitely down. I know I've had a number of people that have said, my downloads are down. And I would say ours, I think most of mine are a little bit, but not a ton. But, you're like, hey, it used to be, whatever, 600, and now it's, 570. Like, I'm down 30. Like, what's up with that? And my guess is it might be people are doing, it's kind of hard to surf and listen to a podcast. There might be some summer things going on, or I don't know, maybe people just want to spend time with their families and not have their earbuds in. But I've seen numbers go down, and I've seen other people comment that anybody else seeing their audience kind of taking a break for a bit. So how about you, Jim? Have you seen anything?
I think it's, I just think we're unfocused on it at the moment. There's other things going on. There's no really big flagship shows driving that piece. I mean, it has replaced talk radio in a lot of ways. So I don't think it's not something I'd be like, well, this is it. This is the end. It's not worth doing this anymore. We're in that consolidation phase where, with the Gartner hype cycle, right? There's the very beginning hype of unrealistic expectations, right? And then there's kind of the top of the hype cycle, which is kind of, it stagnates for a while. And then there's a trough, right, of uncertainty where people don't know where it's going. And I think it's a mature enough cycle that it's not going to go anywhere. But these things can't drive forward forever. They need to take a breather. Yeah. They need to take a break. They got to pull back. We have little dips. I think podcasting is a medium that is well embedded in the ecosystem globally of folks that listen. So we're consolidating, podcasters consolidating, which in a lot of ways, it just means folks are dropping out. And I think staying in the trough is the key. If you want to pick up listeners, right now is the time to pick up listeners. As folks who don't want to do it anymore are stopping, you have an opportunity to pick up those listeners as they're looking for something. So this is not the time to waver. This is the time to fully lean in. If it is dipping, this is the time to lean in. Maybe even pay for some advertising on some podcast players or something to pick up folks that are looking for something new.
I always tell people there's the amount of content being created thanks to the writer and now actor strike. There's going to be less content to watch. And I don't know about you, but when I logged into some of the, the Hulus of the world and things like that, they're like, look, here's a movie from Jason Bateman that you never even knew he made because it probably didn't get released from, 2019. And you're like, I've never heard of that movie. I watched an absolutely horrible movie called The Donor Party on Hulu that I am not a prude, but I was like, wow, that was really bad. And I was like, why is that? Like, I was like, oh, because there's no new content.
Yeah.
Fred says
kids are going back to school too, right? People in cars driving their kids. So you've got another opportunity as we're driving students back to school, pick up that ear share. That
might come back. That's a good point. Craig says our numbers always drop this time of year. Folks are on vacation on Europe. And I heard something on, I think it was Pod News, that August in like England, I don't know if it's a Europe or an England thing, like they just take August off. Like they're all just like, right, we're all going to the beach or something. I don't know. But I never heard that like the UK just like August is just like, no, see bye. We're out of here. I was like, oh, that's kind of cool.
January is kind of that way in Australia.
Yeah.
It's kind of slow. Yeah.
Fred says, I think audio only podcasts are still growing. Yeah, they are, for the record. But the video component is more work, and the laziness factor now rises to the equation. Chris Stone is a awesome supporter. He's also a member of the School of Podcasting, and he has castahead.net. And it's so funny because, like, remember, I did our first Ask the Podcast Coach artwork. I did it in Canva and had a little microphone with a whistle and that whole 9 yards. And then Mark did ours, and I was like, oh, that's what it's supposed to look like. And I've been doing video, and Jeff is saying, and Jeff's another guy that does great work with video. And so before we all poo-poo video, hanging out with Jeff, I was on his Jeff, why can't I remember the name? It's New Media Show. Nope, not New Media Show. New Media something live. New Media Live Show. Help me, Jeff. I know it's New Media Live. It's the third word that I'm drawing a complete brain fart on. But Jeff also is a video guy. So hanging out with Jeff and Chris last week on Basically Off and On, I was like, oh, that's what it's supposed to look like. Social Media News Live. I was missing the social part. Thank you, my friend. So I've actually went back and started learning Descript. And there's still things that, yeah, that's pretty. Mm-hmm.
That's on the video we're showing the original. So that's still on Odyssey.
That's our good friend Odyssey, which was owned by CBS.
I'll be honest. This doesn't look that bad, Dave. I mean, it's blocky. Yeah. The use of fonts was good on this. The Podcast Coach font it's an appropriate use of it. You've got, you use the microphone, which is debatable on whether some people think that's appropriate or not. Love the whistle. It's actually not bad. I don't see it as that. Listen, what Mark did is awesome. Yeah. Right. But I've seen worse.
Yeah. It could have been
in Canva.
It could have been worse. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
But, actually it was my clip on the Social Media News live show and we sent it to Chris. Jeff says, at least the mic isn't on fire. Exactly. And if you go to my channel, just go to youtube.com/David Jackson and look at my shorts. You'll see, that sounds weird. Just look at my shorts. Then you can see what Chris did. And it was just amazing. I was like, oh yeah, that's what a video guy does. It's not, ooh, looky, I can do fades. It's just not my thing. So that's always kind of interesting. But this is where let's say the numbers are going down. Okay, why are you doing this? Now if you're into advertising and you got to get more downloads to get that, better help ad, then that's a problem. But depending on your why, that's not why this show, I do it to give out free podcast consulting and to pick up the occasional Patreon person, which is great. I get to hang out with Jim Collison. What more do you want? So it's that's why I do it. So if my numbers go down, I don't panic.
But it's not a bad. I mean, download numbers are not a bad metric to have as part of your arsenal of things that you check on a regular basis. I personally, the instant messages I get on LinkedIn or the emails that I get at work or to Jim at theaverageguy.tv are much more important to me from a barometer standpoint, from knowing how I'm doing. I asked my audience the question, should I stop? And I got a few emails back that said, no, please don't. Yeah. Like, we really like it, right? Those kinds of responses mean more to me than 1,000 downloads. But downloads are a good indicator of just how healthy things are. And they can actually indicate maybe things aren't going right technically in your channels. Like maybe you've got some things that are going on. If the numbers dip, maybe it's a good idea to check, hey, what's going on over at Apple Podcast? How is this really displaying? Like, how is this being seen in Google? Looking at your stats to kind of say, is there a problem? Is there something technical that I need to think about or kind of work on? So ignoring them, and I know this is not what people are saying. Ignoring them is not the answer, right? They are important in some ways. They're not everything, but they are something. And so I think it's good from time to time to take a look and just say, hey, how am I doing out there? Because you would hate to see the numbers dip. You didn't know, and it was because you have a broken RSS feed.
Yeah. Oh, right. Man. Right? Yeah. I know. Yeah. It's funny you say that. Remember how I always say you're too close to do your own stuff? Yeah. My show, Building a Better Dave, I use Podpage, but there was some show, I think it was the podcast trailer show that I did for about 8 episodes and was like, this is dumb, and I quit. So I was like, oh, you know what? I've already got this Podpage set up. Let's populate it with the RSS feed from Better Dave, and did a whole thing and refresh, and it became Building a Better Dave. But I forgot that in Podpage, you put in the links to Apple, Google, Spotify, and then it puts, the buttons there for you. And to make a long story short, as I was kind of promoting my latest episode of Building a Better Dave, and I clicked on the Apple link, and it took me right to the podcast trailer show. And I was like, oh, ooh. So that was one where, you're too close to see things. But the other one was as I'm getting the links to update those, I go to Google. It's got artwork that's so old, my hair is black. And I was like, what? And I looked in, and Google had not updated Building a Better Dave since June. And why it's still using this old artwork, I don't know. So I went into the Google thing. They have a little question mark, but it's pretty close to nobody's home over at Google Podcasts. We'll see if they update. But that was one where you have a good point. If your numbers take a dive, go check your technology, because as much as it's syndicated and you set it and forget it, one wrong character can break your whole feed. So be careful, especially with Microsoft Word, copying and pasting into your media host. Write your show notes in your media host and then copy and paste them into WordPress or whatever you're using, because that's not a good thing. So we did have another question, and this one was from Behind the Noise podcast, and they ask, how hard is it to rebrand a podcast? They actually just talked about this. I just did it again, Jim. I got to quit unstarring those, because then I lose where they. Anyway,
you don't get a over in your chat.
I get
over here.
I get the star.
It says hide, but do you get it? There's when you bring up the comment and then it scrolls away a little remove hide the hidden thing pops up. I forget what it says.
I'll have to see. I just know I unstarred and it goes away, and I was like, oh crap, now I can't turn it off. But anyway, rebranding is a piece of cake. And what you don't want to do is, let's say you start a show and it's, the Dave Jackson Power Hour, and it just doesn't do any good, because who the heck is Dave Jackson? That's a weird name. What's a Power Hour? Nobody gets it. So I want to rebrand. What you don't do is go, okay, I'm going to start a new show called Marriage Advice from the Divorced Guy. All right. So, okay, that's a little more descriptive. Maybe you know what it is now. Don't start a new show and kill the old one. That's like if I drive to Cleveland and all of a sudden I end up in Sandusky and I'm like, wait, I took a wrong turn. I don't go back to Akron and start going to Cleveland again. I just, pivot from where I am. And they were talking about this on the feed. There was one show that wanted to rebrand, and instead they killed their own show and started a new one. All it takes to rebrand, it's really simple. Number one, put out an episode that just says, hey, everybody, I want to let you know, on Monday, you're going to see the name of this show change, and you're going to see the artwork change, but it's the same show. We're just going to be doing blah, blah, blah. Think Kentucky Fried Chicken to KFC. So when you see that change, don't worry, I'm still here, and I'm still appreciate the fact that you listen. That way, there will be an episode that's called We're Changing the Name. So when people go to episode, let's say the next episode is episode 24. When they go to episode 22 and they go, why is this called the Dave Jackson Power Hour? Now it's called Marriage Advice from the Divorce Guy. They see the episode that said, hey, we're changing the name. And in theory, people should be able to put those together. But all you got to do is change your artwork. And when you change your artwork, make sure, A, it meets Apple specs, so 1400 by 1400, all the way up to 3000 by 3000. And the file size has to be less than 500 kilobytes. But also make sure the file name is different. So if the other one was called podcastart.jpg, make it podcastartwork2.jpg, or it may not update. So change the artwork, change the name in your media host, change your description, and wait 24 hours, and you're done. So have you ever rebranded anything, Jim? In your
yeah, and we had, not that this opposite advice is better or worse, but we did the opposite. We didn't kill it. We just left. We left. So we had Theme Thursday, and we had 6 seasons of it, and it had a different host than it does now. And we decided to just start a new podcast. We called it the Clifton Strengths Podcast. Similar content than the other one, than Theme Thursday, but we really felt like that podcast had such a strong brand. We didn't want to break it. We still get. We haven't done an episode in 2 years, and we still get 10 or 15,000 downloads a month to it. So it's obviously getting used. We didn't want to do market confusion at that point, so we just lifted up the concept and moved it over to the Clifton Strengths Podcast. Started a whole new feed, new everything. Then I did an episode at the end that we put on Theme Thursday that said, "Hey, want to let you know if you've made it this far, you've come to the end of the internet. jump over now and subscribe to the Clifton Strengths podcast, and you can join us over there for future podcasts. And that new podcast now is doing what Theme Thursday, the old one, had done numbers-wise before we converted it. So you can create a new one if you want to, but you've got to do some work, to move listeners from one to the other. And we were able to do that successfully.
Yeah, Uncle Marv makes a great point. If your rebrand means you're changing your website, be very careful with that, especially if you use PowerPress for your feed. Nothing wrong with PowerPress. It's a fine, upstanding podcasting plugin. But if you change your URL, you just changed your feed, and now you've got a dead feed in Apple. So be careful. You actually need to have them both running at the same time. So you need to kind of clone your website and then point the old website at the new website and things like that. So if you need help with that, we can help with that as well. So, but
we means you.
Okay,
just so folks know.
Not interested. No, okay.
That's Dave Jackson, School of Podcasting. Check that out.
There we go. And Jeff wants to know. I'd love to know what the media hosts are. Is there a resource for a character count for descriptions in your episode descriptions, your show notes for a different podcast networks? I moved to a new podcast hosting company and noticed it was truncated in Apple Podcasts. I want to say it's 4,000 characters. And the only way I ever character count is I cheat. I copy and paste it into a Google Doc, and under tools, I think it is, there's a word count in there for it. But I wish there was something in Media Host that said, hey, this is where it's going to get truncated. There's a great article by James Cridlin. I'll put a link in the show notes. And it's, is this going to come on Google? Yes. Oh, it's not. Because I answer this so much that, crap. What I'm trying to do is I have Text Expander. I love Text Expander. And when I type in #19, here we go. James has this article he looked at 19 different apps, and is it going to let me? Yes. Okay. And it comes down to this. In your media host, type your show notes, and don't get crazy. Don't try to add a table or an iframe or things like that. Bolding, maybe some bullet points, maybe some numbers. Don't get too crazy with that. And it should look okay. But there are apps, for whatever reason, that you can give them, here's some fine, clean HTML, and they will just destroy it. And you're like, why doesn't it look good over there? And they're like, because they suck. They don't know how to make a podcast app. So it is kind of tricky, but I don't know of any. I'd have to think about that. I think at one point in the old days, I think Libsyn had a character count, and I don't think they do anymore. But it's I want to say if you Google that, if you ask Uncle Google, I'm pretty sure it's a 4,000 character limit.
It is.
Is it?
I
Okay.
just verified it. Yeah.
So,
although they don't show it all, right? What I'm finding here is I did a little search on this. It says most will truncate it with a read more link at the 120 to 150 character limit.
Interesting. So, and that's where in some cases, that's a whole other question is what do you put in show notes? We had this at the School of Podcasting, and I said, well, there are two things. There's show notes for the app. That's what you type into your media host. And then there's show notes, your episode description on your website. And I think this is one of those things where everybody has their own thing. So I usually write a paragraph, which is really hard on this show because it's like, here are the 14 things we talked about in 90 minutes. But I usually, it's like, I'm trying to answer the question for the listener, should I listen to this? So there's a bit of a like, here's what we're going to talk about. And then, Darren had emailed us that I mentioned about a cheap lavalier mic. And it is this one, the Powered to Wise lav mic. And he said, you didn't say the name and you didn't put a link in the show notes. And I was like, oh, and you actually get two for like $39, and they're not bad. And the cable on these is insanely long. So I could, probably, I know Jim's out there in Yeah, where you are.
Nebraska.
Thank you. I was going to say Arkansas, and I'm like, it's not Arkansas.
It's a flyover state. It's okay.
It's the cable is long enough to where I could put a lav on Jim and be okay. So that was the name of that. But getting back to show notes, he was looking for the link. So I usually try to put a paragraph to let people know this is what you're going to get out of this. Then links to whatever I mentioned, which on this show is brutal. And then, links to follow the show. And that's usually it for me. And then when I go to my website, now that's where I expand it. So for like the School of Podcasting, I write a blog post first just to get my ADD brain focused on what am I trying to say here? And so that's my workflow. But for me, your website should have more words because that's Google food. And I don't know, if somebody has, I think, and this is just me where I think everybody thinks like me, which is really, maybe we don't want to do that. But if I open up episode notes and it's TLDR, and if you're like, what does that mean? Too long, didn't read. If I have to really scroll to find something, there was a part of me that's like, oh, I'll look at this later because we're all, busy. I don't know.
Well, I mean, you would write it like an article for a newspaper where you begin with short descriptions up front, right? So for the folks who just are going to read they get past the headline and they actually get to the article, you want to be really clear in the first couple sentences and kind of cover most of it, then begin to layer in detail as you go, right? So that in physically the way you see it, if you land on it and it's a giant paragraph for the very first thing, most people, they're out. They're like, no, that's way too much.
Yeah.
So make sure you're breaking that up. That's why in the old days on newspapers with print and even on the web today, those very, very, very short paragraphs for people, especially early on. If it's a wall of text, they're most likely not going to read it.
Yeah.
A lot of white space around it.
That's why when you write a blog post, you want to break things up you want to use that H2 setting a lot so it breaks things up because people don't read. They scan, and that's where your headlines kind of let them know, ooh, where do I need to read this? And eventually they'll start to read part of it, and if it's good, they might actually go back to the top. But as someone who works in support, I can wholeheartedly, without a doubt, say people do not read. And I know people accuse support of not reading. We read every ticket. There are times when we might sound like we're not, and we're just giving you off a pre-written answer, but I don't do that. So I read everything because that saves me time and it saves you a headache. So
well, I'm on the Casto site, and they've got this 3-part recommendation for descriptions, and I think this can apply to any of those kinds of things. But they have this first sentence, say something to your listeners that they already believe is true or agree with, right? Get that buy-in from your audience. Second sentence, what your listeners can expect to hear it in each episode or what they can expect to hear in that episode, right? And then third sentence, who is the show for, plus some keywords for search. 3 sentences, kind of a nice bing, bang, boom, something they'll agree with, what they expect to hear, a little bit of detail in a sentence. That's probably good enough.
What I do sometimes is if I have my notes from if I did an interview, I look at what questions that I ask. And sometimes I won't put the actual question, but that'll let me know we talk about subjects such as blah, blah, blah. Just again, you're trying to give people the idea of should I listen to this or not? And it sounds weird because people are like, well, what if I write enough detail and they go, oh, yeah, that's not for me. I go, you just saved them 20 minutes. And I appreciate when somebody goes, hey, this isn't for you. So that's, Jeff says, I've told my kids I build my career from reading the manual, and most people don't. Yeah, that's true. And I remember once when I first got the PodTrack P4, and I'm like going through every single menu system, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, how do you turn on mix minus on this thing? And I finally read the manual, and that's where it says, oh, by the way, build in. And I was like, wow. But I wasted a lot of time. So when in doubt, in support, there used to be a thing called RTFM, and F is not fire truck. Read the manual. where'd it go? I lost it. Somebody asked about, and Tim, I see your question. We're going to hit that in just a second. Someone had asked about, is there any AI for podcasting? And that was Mark had asked about that. I have a episode on this. If you go to podcastingresources.net, there's an episode called Enough Podcast AI to Choke a Horse. And it talks about, there's so many. There's Cast Magic, there's Swell AI, there's Pod Squeeze, there's Clean Voice, there's Cap Show. There's more than that now. I mean, they just, every time you turn around, I always go, God bless you for having the hope to launch the same product that's already been launched 5 times. They all do have a little different things. You know, there's ChatGPT. I know Craig from
Otter AI.
Yeah, there's of course, you know, Craig from livewellandflourish.com. Have you subscribed to that show yet? You should. But Craig's a big ChatGPT guy. And there's some, like, I learned that really what these tools are doing that we're paying for, there are plugins for ChatGPT. And one of them is like kind of a marketing arm that'll give you titles and write ad copy. And another one is this. And I was like, now you got to pay for it. This is not the free ChatGPT. And I went, well, that's all these tools are doing. They're just putting a name on it and calling it Cast Magic. And I was like, it's just, you know,
resellers. They're just resellers.
Yeah,
of it.
you pay for things in time and money, so you can pay in time to go figure out how to add a plug-in to ChatGPT and blah blah blah, or you could just pay somebody else who's already done it and done some things for it. So
this morning I was in YouTube posting the most recent episode of Home Gadget Geeks, and it gave me some titles. Suggestions.
Yeah.
So it was terrible. It was just one, so not titles, but it was a title suggestion. So I put my title in, and then right below it, it said, do you want to use this title? And it started with the episode number, and then it had just a bunch of words. Like it almost was keyword stuffing itself. And I was like, yeah, no, I don't want that. So I left some feedback, and I said, boys, nice try. You got some work to do. I don't know what you're using, but it's not very good. Now, the potential is awesome with YouTube, right? Because in theory, they've transcribed it already, and they should have some. They have Bard. Is it Bard? They have their version of ChatGPT. Titling has gotten ChatGPT on titling is pretty good. If you give it some text and say, give me 10 titles for this, it'll do that for you in the free version. So, you know, you can at least give you some good ideas. But yeah, Dave, the inside YouTube, I don't know if everybody has it yet, but it's starting to suggest titles, which I find very, very interesting. If they get better than what I saw this morning, that could be helpful. But the one I got this morning was not very good.
Well, the other thing that I'm starting to see, I think we're going to get some kaleidoscope action here for maybe not. No, good. I met these guys in London, and it is now AI for video. So you basically upload your file, and you always have to remember, any AI is going to get you 75, 85% of the way there. And it was kind of cool. I mean, I uploaded this show once, and it spit out about 9 different clips. And I was kind of like, oh, all right. It's clipgen.io. I'll have a link in the show notes. They do have an affiliate program. So that's, but I met them in London, and they emailed me like, hey, we have an affiliate program. I'm like, well, I need to look into this now. But it was interesting. You can pick if it's vertical or horizontal, and you can zoom in on all sorts of stuff. But in terms of can I just upload it and magic comes out the other side? It's magical, but I still had to go in because there are times when I was like, oh, wait, they have the next 2 words of the next sentence. I need this to stop about, 0.7 seconds sooner kind of stuff. So it's interesting. A lot of fun tools and things like that, I'll be interested to see where it goes. Because again, this is where we say, well, this is as bad as it's going to get. And it'll be interesting to see, moving forward. I saw Pictory. I think, Pictory was, there was a webinar that Deidre over at Capshow did with this, and they were showing how you could get a snippet from Capshow, upload the video to Pictory, search for that phrase, And then it did the whole thing where if you wanted to, you could have it do like AI voiceover and then B-roll and all sorts of stuff that was like, I was like, well, this video tool is getting, and like all the AI, like let's do all the transcription stuff for audio, but now they're working their way to video. And I'm sure there's tons more stuff. Jeff and Chris probably know a ton of that stuff, but it's interesting as you move forward. Rich wants to know, hey, Jim, are you using VidIQ or TubeBuddy? Those extensions will give you title suggestions. And it's interesting. I have TubeBuddy. I bought it from Miss Eileen many moons ago. And then Tim Schmoyer, who is one of the guys I go to for YouTube advice, he is using vidIQ. And I want to say he's somehow partnered with him. But those are the two I hear about. Do you use either of those, Jim?
I do not. No.
Yeah.
I'll check them out now.
Yeah, TubeBuddy is the epitome for me of I bought it and never read the manual. So anything I use at TubeBuddy, it's because I'm stumbling through it, and I really should take my time and again, I've probably got a tool over that I'm like, oh man, this is so cool, and I haven't been using it for months and months and months. So it's like you got to be take the time. Otherwise, you're just burning your money in some cases. Speaking of that, I did find I don't play much in WordPress, or I shouldn't say I don't play as much with WordPress anymore, but there's a cool page builder. And the thing I hate about page builders, and I'm trying to verify this, it's called Spectra. And what I like about it versus other ones where, like if you use Elementor, and let's say you use the Elementor plugin, and later you turn off the Elementor plugin, any page you made with Elementor just turns into gibberish. And this uses the core WordPress language, I guess. And it was pretty sweet. I was playing with it last night, and it uses all the blocks. I know, Jim, you said you were playing with WordPress with getting more into blocks, but it takes the blocks that are in WordPress and kind of puts them on steroids. So I had one where it was like, put in the posts, and it did this. And then you could say, do you want to show the date or not? Do you want to show the title? Do you want to show the image? How long do you want the excerpt to be? It was really pretty slick, and it just made it easy. And I was like, okay. And then they have another theme called Astra. It's a whole same company. They have a plugin, but their whole thing is lightweight, powerful WordPress tools that help in SEO. And I'm like, well, there's check, check, and check of what people are looking for. So if you're a WordPress person, and like for me right now, if you go to the School of Podcasting /episodes, you will see that I'm using Elementor, and it makes this nice, cool thing. I use second line themes and then Elementor. And unfortunately, I've told it like, hey, put like 12 episodes on the front. So it's got this little grid of that. And then you'll see at the bottom of the 12 where you can go to the next page, or you can scroll down and see the exact same thing repeated. And I've looked into this page. I have deleted and recreated, and there's some sort of, I'm sure, plugin thing or theme thing, but my episodes are duplicate. And it's not like it just keeps repeating. Like you think, oh, does it do it a third time and a fourth? No, it's just two. And I was like, I should be able to look at the source of that and figure out what it is. And so that's what kind of led me to like, is there a thing that actually uses WordPress to do this that I can recreate it? So do you remember what theme you're using on your WordPress stuff? It's probably,
that's a good, it's an older theme. Yeah.
It's one of those things like you kind of set it. Once you get it done, you're like, you just make posts. You don't really think about it.
Well, and Randy Walker, who was on my show last week and is a WordPress guy, said your theme may not be block enabled. That may be or not designed to work well with blocks. We got it all figured out. And, I'm on 6.3. Blocks came a long time ago.
Yeah.
I'm just now figuring out. I mean, just in the last 2 weeks, I've been, this is bad to admit, but I've been doing, HTML code.
Yeah, I have.
I've been doing it in code, right?
I think it's called the classic something, or whatever it is. It's like, hey, I don't want to do blocks plugin, and it makes it look like the old version of. I've been on that forever, so I was like, all right, maybe I need, because I was not a big fan of blocks. I could never quite get them to do.
It's pretty handy now. I think they got most of the bugs worked out. Example, if I go to put a link in, you put the link in, and a editor box pops up and says, do you want this to be the text or do you want it to be a link? And if you just click link, then it formats it for you, which is kind of nice. You don't have to do the code on that. So there are some things about blocks. You can set up block templates so that if your posts are going to have the same information them all the time, you can have a template to go to for your workflow. That may be handy. It may not be. I'm getting better. I mean, listen, I've been doing it for a week, but I am better this week than I was last week using blocks. And I'm still flipping back and forth between the visual editor and the code editor, just as I'm kind of figuring some of these things out. Like I figured out, I'm going to embed a YouTube video in using the block function of the YouTube instance. It's easier just to add a new one and put the link in as opposed to trying to edit the old one. So it's just one of those things with the code. I'd always just go back in and take the 11-digit YouTube code. Just copy and paste. You're done, right? Well, if I'm going to use blocks, it's better if I just put add the YouTube block and put the link in, and then I'm done. So it's learning things like that.
Always fun. Learning new things. Yay, learning curves. Woohoo. Hey.
Listen, the block idea is not a bad one. It has not been received well by some in the WordPress community. So
the new version of WordPress, they kind of changed some things in their interface, made it a little easier. I was watching a video on that last night. And it's because there are reusable blocks or dynamic blocks. So you could have a block that is for your newsletter or whatever you want, and then put that block in a bunch of episodes, and then you change that block in one place, and it changes across your whole website. I was like, oh, that's kind of cool, because that's the Podpage has a signature feature that does that. But you know what's not hard to figure out? That's right, becoming an awesome supporter. You just got to go to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome, and you can be an awesome supporter and, support us. It's great. You'll feel better. How's that for a sales pitch?
Your well-being will be higher if you support us. Yeah, it'll feel good.
You won't feel guilty watching this live going,
correct,
I should be paying for this. You can say, no, I already am. You can also join me over at the School of Podcasting like Chris Stone did and Nancy did this week, and Craig has for a while. We've got courses. We got coaching and community. We do a thing every Friday, Lunch with Dave, and it's slowly, the word is getting out that that's actually fun. And it's the next episode of the School of Podcasting is going to have a small clip from that. So you get unlimited one-on-one coaching. So if you want to hang out with Dave and pick my brain some more, you can do that there. And right now in August, that's right, it's the Back to School special. This is where I would play the air horn sound effect if I knew where it was. But in August, if you buy a yearly subscription, you get a free Samson Q2U shipped to you. Brand new, by the way. It's not like the one in my bookcase. It's actually a new one. So you'll get that little baby stand that makes you hunch over like a hunchback. That's great. And Tim, we didn't answer his question yet. We'll answer his question in a minute about speaking of that. But our Spotlight Support of the Week is, again, have you subscribed to this yet? Come on. livewellandflourish.com/follow will take you over to where you can just subscribe in Apple and Spotify and all that stuff. It's a really good show. Thank you so much for your support, Craig. We deeply appreciate that. And we mentioned Podpage earlier. If you want to try Podpage, my affiliate link is trypodpage.com. And if you want to learn Podpage, learnpodpage.com will take you to a free course on that. And if you need more Jim Collison, well, who doesn't, right? TheAverageGuy.tv will get you right over to where you can check out Home Gadget Geeks. And we are still on the road. Thank you, Craig. We're closer to 40 than we were. But if you haven't become an awesome supporter, you should. Shouldn't you really? I mean, isn't it time that you do that? So askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome. And I know last week I said I was going to think about leaving Patreon, and that's as far as I got on that because they switched their payment processing to Scotland or Ireland or something that ends in land, and it did not go well. And I've heard where, that's not, people kind of get upset when you mess with their income. Shocking on that, Tony has a tip for us. It says, whenever bringing up a new post live, be sure to add the URL to Google's URL submitter. Be sure to get all the posts indexed as soon as possible. Yep. That's one of those things. I forget what there's another thing too. That's like the hubbub of the sub thing that it's a bunch of really weird words put together that will do that. So,
Google will eventually crawl it, but but you get it in there right away. You kind of prompt them, say, hey, look at this. That puts it in their database. And it's a little bit faster. It's a good tip. Tony's coming in on LinkedIn, by the way, too. He is listening via LinkedIn.
That is something, again, talking about things that I'm not getting the most out of. I thought it was interesting, and I might have mentioned this before. I bought some course on Udemy because it was like, $1.50 or something that they had discounted it to. But Udemy said, hey, do you want to schedule some time to learn this? And you can put it on your calendar. And I was like, oh, that's pretty slick. But LinkedIn is something for years that I've been going, I really should spend more time over at LinkedIn because, for me, the number one way to use podcasting is to market we talked about it earlier, right? Promoting your business with that. And, maybe go hang out where people have businesses. That might not be such a bad idea. And yet here I sit. I've listened to a few episodes. I've met LinkedIn gurus at different events and things like that. I'm like, oh yeah, I need to go back and spend more time on that. And yet I don't. So that's always kind of fun. Jim, you mentioned that you've been playing with WordPress and the new blocks. It's like you said, you're getting better. Is it on a scale of frustrating? Like 10 is like I'm ready to throw my computer out the window?
3. It's actually not as hard. It was super helpful to have Randy after the show because I admitted during the show, I'm like, I know there's this new blocks thing. He's like, new? He's like, Jim, it's been around for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And then I was like, I never really figured it out. So after the show, he sat me down. He's like, hey, let's go through a few. He goes, share your screen with me. So we get into them. He's like, right, click on this, check on this, click here, do this. Oh, there's the blocks. And he taught me how to switch in between the block and the visual, the visual editor and the code editor. And I was like, oh, this is actually really helpful. And so kind of what I've learned is not to go all in on the thing from day one. Like I changed a few things, then I published the episode. Then this week, I went back and learned a few more things, like the tip on the YouTube embedding a YouTube video in there. The way the block does it is actually better than the way I was doing it after I inspected the code. I'm like, oh yeah, this is actually better code. So it's more dynamic for mobile and for PC. So I'm like, yeah, I'm going to start using the block. So Dave, I try to pick up little things at a time. Each week I'm posting it. Then I'm going to try and teach myself something new or see if I can learn something different about the blocks to get in there. So it's not terrible. And if you're in WordPress and you're not using it, that's probably worth a look. But hey, whatever works best for you, I'm just finding it's kind of nice to be able to. I want to get to the point where I do have a template that I use every week because I am for Home Gadget Geeks. It's the same post every week. I'd go in and change some things so it's different, right? Add some text and stuff. But I'd love to have a template set up and ready to go that I just pull up, put the title in, put my stuff in, and publish and make it that clean. It'll maybe 4 or 5 months to get to that point.
Yeah, I do that with Text Expander, but also on the Podcast Rodeo show. That's on Captivate, and Captivate it's super slick. And then I'm just like, oh, which template do you want to use? And I'm like, this one, and it's already got, here's the title of the show. I just fill in a form and it's done. It makes it super simple. The other thing I thought, and I for our audio friends, I will try to explain what I'm doing here. I finally got behind the scenes. I was talking about this plugin, Spectra. And so when you add it, it's free. They do have some pro stuff, but this is, I'm not sure how many blocks there are, but you can add a container. So I could say, hey, let's first add a container, and I could say, oh, how many columns do you want that container to have? And then you just have all these headings, countdown timers, block quotes. What I did was I added some down post grid. So if I said, hey, let's do this, and then it goes in and it finds your posts. And so over here, I can now click on this and go over to style and pick how many columns I want. And it's just crazy. So it's free. And I like the fact that A, it uses WordPress, and then B, they added more things in there. Because some of this stuff you're like, well, that's just like Elementor. And I'm like, yeah, and this is what I need to figure out is I want to go in today and turn off that plugin and see if my page is still there, my default answer is no, it's still going to be gibberish. It's just because they wrote it in WordPress language. I'm sure there's stuff in the plugin, but it just seemed a lot easier. I know with Divi and Elementor, you have to go in and I want to edit this with Elementor, and it's like, hold on, I got to fire up the engine, And granted, it's really flexible and things like that, but there are times when I know with Divi, I just seemed like it was like asking me like, okay, what is the color of the outline? And I'd be like, okay, it's black. And it's like, how thick do you want the shadow of the line of the, I'm like, I really don't need this much detail. I just want it to, it's kind of crazy. Yeah. So that's always kind of nuts.
Well, and so I'm not trying to solve any problems by going to blocks. It was just one of those. It was one of those opportunities where somebody's like, "Hey, have you tried this?" And I've been avoiding it. And the old way worked for me. But doing what I do, I thought, I actually need to know something about this if I'm gonna be on a show called Ask the Podcast Coach, and I really didn't know anything about blocks. Well, here's a good opportunity to learn. So diving in, it actually made more work for me than it saved to begin with, but I'm kind of hoping in the future that's the direction WordPress is headed or has headed.
Yeah.
Maybe is the right way to say it, right?
Well, that was it. It was just, to me, I was kind of like, all right, it's time to start using the new stuff. And it really boils down to, we like to be comfortable, and I know how to do it in this thing. And I was like, well, there might be some more features and things of that nature. So you move on. Here's a fun question. We get this every now and then. It says, hello, everyone. I'm starting a podcast next Friday. I'll record then. My podcast is on public health. I need topics to speak on. I feel not prepared enough to speak on the ones I already, and that's the end of that sentence. I have already, I see. Any suggestions will be welcome. And that's where I kind of go, I know you said next week, but there's no rule that says you couldn't wait another couple weeks. And I know I've heard Daniel J. Lewis, I've heard a bunch of people say, don't write out a script, but just write up 10 topics that you're going to talk about. And if you can't come up with 10 topics, maybe now is not the best time to start the podcast. It's not a you should never podcast. It's like maybe now is not the time to start a podcast. So when I saw that, I was kind of like, and it's hard to come up with topics, especially the longer you do it and things of that nature. For me, the last episode I did was based on, and as is this week, are things that I'm hearing in my own community. And I'm like, oh, if they have a question, then somebody else is asking that question as well. So, it's one of those things where I always say, just be where your audience is. To answer her question, what should I talk about? Go over to Amazon and search for your topic. And most books have a preview where you can read the table of contents and things like that. That might give you some ideas after you look out over a couple books, things like that. And then again, there's YouTube, there's Reddit, there's all sorts of places where you can go to Facebook groups. I'm in so many Facebook groups, but I just lurk. I'm just listening to see what people are struggling with. When I went to Podcast Movement, whenever that was out in Las Vegas, and I heard the phrase overwhelm. Like, this is just overwhelming. I was like, I need to do an episode on how to deal with being overwhelmed because you're learning new stuff and that whole 9 yards. So Coach Dave says, I have the formula. I pick 10 frequently asked questions and 10 should ask questions. Ooh, there's a good one. Somebody in Reddit today poked the bear and they brought up listen notes. And they're like, is this BS? And I'm like, yes. So if you hear anybody saying, I'm in the top 1%, you should run away from those people. So if you have 10 frequently asked questions and 10 I should ask questions, well, then you got 20 episodes right there. So you're ready to go. So, and that's another one too. You could go to ChatGPT. You could go answerthepublic.com is another one where you can just type in your topic and it'll show you what people are searching for. You can do that in Google. I called it Google, I think it was Bingo, where you start to type in a word and it'll kind of guess what you're searching for. And if it's guessing for that, that's something else. But if you're not sure what to talk about, don't fire up the microphone yet. Do a little research, figure out who, again, Tony was talking about it. You got to know, why am I doing this and who is it for? I say that's, if I got paid a nickel for every time I've said that, I would be retired by now. Because if you just talk about the stuff you want to talk about because you want people to, whatever, give you money, spread the word, whatever, that might not be entertaining enough to hold the audience. And if you just talk about what they want to talk about, but you don't get anywhere close to achieving your goals, we were talking earlier about how there are other things to measure than downloads. Well, that's going to burn you out. So it's always kind of tricky to find the mix of the why and the who, and where those overlap. That's where you're going to find content that keeps people energized, keep you energized. So you don't do that. How do you, Jim, do you have any input, going back to the fact that you podcast for work? Do you get to suggest ideas, or is this something that another team comes in and goes, here's what the topic is, and you just get to,
Yeah, a little bit of both. I've had our marketing teams come to me and say, hey, we're going to create a pillar page. We want to create some content for it. Can you do these 5 things? We'll set it up with these people, and then you're going to do the interview. Then I've done, and we do like case study style format, where we go in and interview a customer. I just did one of these yesterday. Interview the customer. What was the problem? What did you implement from a solution? What was your success, right? Just a case study format. So a little bit of both, but it initially, the idea when they started thinking about they were going to do build this coaching community, and they wanted a way to keep them educated and on topic and motivated. I was like, hey, I got a way to do this. It's called a podcast. And they said, what's a podcast?
Of course.
And so, I mean, it was early. It was super early when we first started doing this. So, but I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt what we needed to do before we'd even done the first one. I knew what it was going to look like. I knew. Now we've changed some things, and I've grown and learned and some stuff. But I had a very clear vision of we were going to interview coaches who were in this business, and we just wanted their experience. That's what we were going to do. It was just an interview show. And I said, I can do 1,000 of those. No problem. Just give me people, and I can do 1,000 of those. And I have.
There you go.
In the 10 years, maybe a couple thousand of those.
I was going to say, I know you've been doing it a while.
Yeah, we got a lot out there.
Coach Dave says, I don't think we're ever perfectly prepared to talk about any subject. I give it 100% of my best for a defined time, and after that, I cite my sources, check my ego at the door, stay humble, and publish. Yeah, that's it. And I will say things like, I remember I did an episode on the one I was talking about, Spectra, that plugin, and I said, look, I've only used this for like 4 days, but from what I've seen so far, it's pretty cool. So, as much as I'm excited about this, I want you to know that ahead of time. The other question that I'm looking at this going, why didn't I bring this up sooner? This, again, is from the School of Podcasting group. And Nancy asked this question. She said, is there anything new that is catching people's attention that is growing your audience? Because we talk a lot about on this show that people want to grow their audience. And I think I thought about this. The one thing that catches my attention, and it sounds kind of like duh, but it's a good show. Like when I heard Craig's show, I was like, oh wow, this is obviously somebody who's thought this out. It's not just you fired up and it's two guys going, hey man, like let's do it Rogan style, and they waste your time. So I think one thing that makes you stand out is decent audio quality. That doesn't mean you spend $5,000. You spend $69 on a Samsung Q2U. That'll get you there. And then just I was working with a radio guy, and I'm going to talk to him later today. But radio guys have old habits that need to die a little bit, and that is he kept doing, because in radio you kind of broadcast like you're standing in an office and your audience is in the hallway walking by. So you constantly say, hey, I'm talking with Jim Collison here. You don't need to do a reset in podcast. You might if you want to reinforce the brand or something like that. So, but to me, just having a good show, I think makes you stand out because there's so many really, really bad ones. But then you get into, appearing on all the other stuff. But that was, I think the thing that threw me for a loop was new things people are doing. And I was like, because there's the whole appear on other shows, use social media, buy ads where available, promote your show. But I think the big one to me that just makes shows stand out is when they're, to the point with great content that fits me like a glove. I don't know. Can you think of anything that makes a show stand out?
Entertaining in the sense that this is the hard part. You don't want the entertainment to be overpowering for the content, right? Unless you do. I mean, it all depends on why you're coming to I don't personally listen to comedy podcasts or entertainment podcasts exclusively. I'm always looking for education in the stuff that I'm doing, but I love it when I have the education with some humor. And I love the dynamic. This is why I love this show so much. I love coming on, I've done 450 of these things with you, is because it fits the style that I like to listen to, which is people talking to each other, so a little bit of humor and some content, and you learn a few things. Listen, I learn as much. I mean, today I've learned 3 or 4 things already that I'm like, okay, I made marks on these things. I'm going to go back and check them out. Like, I like to learn as well. So for me, the edutainment style is kind of what I like. And I like this back and forth. We could add a third person, maybe it would still be there, but I like this style. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what I like.
Yeah. And then Tony has a great point, and that is look at somebody who's having success and reverse engineer. I do that a lot with Jordan Harbinger. Jordan Harbinger is a guy that gets hundreds of thousands of downloads an episode, and it looks like he's all over the place, because he's interviewing somebody from the FBI and then somebody from this and somebody from that, and then he'll interview Kobe Bryant, but they're all through the lens of critical thinking. Mm-hmm. So he has, all those people talked about the same subject, even though they had different backgrounds. The thing that I forget YouTube. I'm listening to the YouTube formula. This is a guy that coaches Mr. Beast. He wrote the book. It's a pretty good book. And he said the problem that a lot of people do is they'll look at, oh, wow, I'm going to try to be Serial, or I'm going to try to be, Joe Rogan or whatever. And the strategy that works for them does not 100% mean it's going to work for you, because it's a different audience. So if I try to do a 4-hour podcast because I think I'm Joe Rogan, but the people I'm trying to attract don't have 4 hours to listen to a podcast, that is not going to work. So yeah, definitely look at what they're doing for strategies and try it. I think that's the other thing. I see a lot of people are like, yeah, my show's not growing. What are you trying? Well, I've done this, I've done that. Okay, what else are you doing? Like, I don't know. I'm like, well, keep trying. It's, I think that's one of the kind of characteristics, I think, of successful podcasters is they didn't just go, well, that didn't work. All right, well, I guess we'll quit now. So yeah, one size does not fit all. So
and we say this a lot, but be yourself, because you can't fake it. You can't be somebody else that long. Eventually it's going to come through. You are going to come through. So start with you, be you, get comfortable with you, find the best parts of you and use them all the time, right? It's a strengths-based methodology, right? And that may attract a ton of people, or it may attract 5. But the 5 you get are 5 privileges that you have. Yeah. You are privileged to have them, and take good care of the 5 or 500 or 5,000 that you've attracted to it. So that would be what I would say. Be you.
Well, that's it. My last episode was about finding your voice, and really finding your voice is already there. It's just got a bunch of what Randy Cantrell would call head trash. You got a bunch of head trash there. And once you peel away the imposter syndrome and nobody's going to listen to me and all this other stuff, you just be yourself. And I talked about Brenda, who's a member of the School of Podcasting, and she was trying to kind of be NPR and all this other stuff. And her one friend, again, you need a friend that will tell you the truth, that said, like, you're not being you. And so, because I asked her, she sent me her second version of her first episode. I go, this is so much better. Not that the first one was bad, but like, what did you do? And she goes, I guess I was just being myself more. And I go, exactly. So that's a whole, I swear I should be like a podcast therapist. I should be, forget podcast consultant. My title should be podcast therapist, because half the time I'm just helping people get over themselves, really. And yeah, so kudos to what Jim said. And just be yourself. And that actually then helps set your show apart. How do I stand out? Well, you're like nobody else. And so you end up sounding and acting and being like no other podcast. So
yeah, that doesn't mean you can't get better, by the way. Like, I think sometimes we think that like, well, that's just me. I'm just going to be me. And if I say, and I lose track of things and I'm all over the place. Well, I mean, you can still do that if you want to, but there are some tips and techniques and some things that we can do here where we can get better at it. So there's that, there is that balance there too, of be the best of you, but continue to get better at being you. Like, evaluate yourself, listen to your content, go back, like just what you said, Dave. Get somebody besides your mom, or maybe even your mom. My mom was super critical of everything I did. So
thanks, Mom.
Listening to her was not always bad advice. She'd say things like, "That's it." You're like, "Oh, geez, Mom, thanks. I thought I'd get a little bit more than that." But anyways, get somebody to critically, like you said, to give you some feedback. You can get better at these things. You can get better at the way you project. You can get better at your cadence. You can get better at your vocal quality. You can get better at your content. Those things you can get better at. So I don't want to paint a picture of just be you and that's it, be static. Right. Continue to be learning.
That's a great point. One of the things I mentioned earlier, my first job out of college, I would drive to Canton to go to these meetings, and like giant banners, fluorescent yellow with giant letters that just said constant improvement. Yeah. And it was everywhere. And that really got ingrained. That the culture of that job was phenomenal. It was the CEO was an ex-dean of a college, so he had a very educational slant to everything. But that is something that, between that and the Dead Poet Society, I am always carpe diem and trying to learn. Like every day, it's kind of like, okay, what did we learn today? We learned that you don't plant grass before it rains. As much as it needs water, it will wash away all of your seed. So you got to find something to, do that.
Unless you put straw down, you could put the little straw will help hold it in place.
It did, but it didn't. It doesn't work if you have a monsoon come through your town.
There you go. I just joking with you.
But you learn stuff, and then you get better, and that's why, how long? 13 years? How long you been doing this, Jim? 14?
Yeah, 13, something like that.
13. Yeah. I know I'm 18, so it's like after a while, never do math on a podcast. That's not good.
No.
But
or maybe it was 09. I can't remember. I always have to go back and check. I think it was 09, so that would be 13, 14, something like that.
There we go. But thanks for everybody showing up. Jim, any idea what's going on with the Home Gadget Geeks this week?
Yeah, just put it out. Jay Franzi joins me. I think he listens to this show as well. And we spend a little time thinking about the impending, student loan payments are due in October again, and wondering just how much money is going to come out of the economy for that. And so we talked about using tech for discount sites, coupon codes, some of those kinds of things.
Capital One, I have an online, and I went to Amazon, and they're like, "Hey, wait, before you go that microphone, there's a brand new one over eBay." And I was like, "Really?" I go over in the box, never been opened, saved me $60, and then I earned like $3.64 for. I don't know why, but I'll take $3.64. So
you think like Slick Deals and Honey, some of those Honey now owned by PayPal, right? You think about those, and maybe a little advice of put it in the cart and leave it. You might get an email the next day that has a discount code or shipping, right? So we talk about all that. It's posted right now, homegadgetgeeks.com.
Yeah. On the School of Podcasting, it's one of those stew episodes where I've got a lot of little baby topics that aren't really big enough for one. So some of these we've talked about, like what do I do with my files, a couple other tools and resources. So that'll be coming up on the School of Podcasting.com. Thanks to Mark over at podcastbranding.co and Dan over at based on a true story podcast.com. Thanks to the awesome 16 people that made it to the end in the chat room. So I always appreciate you being here. Tony, thanks for joining us. Tony is new. Be sure to like and subscribe. Definitely subscribe, even if you never come back. I got turned down from Canva for an affiliate program because I didn't have 5,000 people on YouTube. I was like, bite me, Canva.
Really?
Yeah.
Get out there, hit that like button right now and subscribe right now.
We'll see you later, everybody.